Mount Lebanon, a conversation about the Druze people. And this is a conversation I had with my friend Kamal Takieddine, who gave us some insight about Druze history and Druze tradition. One thing I would like to make a note of is that sometimes you'll see the sound quality maybe change a little bit. We did have to change location at one point in the towards the end of the podcast. Where we were, it was about to close, so so we changed location, and also I'm recording this in a different location as well. So and I'm just going to add it in. So you'll notice a bit of a change in the sound, but I felt the podcast turned out really good. First, I have a little bit of a message here, and then we'll get right back into the conversation. Hello, listeners. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I sure hope that you've been enjoying the thoughts given in the Historical Thoughts and Interpretations episodes. But I would like to ask if you would consider making a pledge to the podcast via Patreon. I have many projects in mind for this podcast, and the books, paper, and so on needed to produce the episodes will not be free. Help keep Historical Thoughts flowing so that we can interpret the past and learn from it. You may pledge any amount that you like, and whatever you choose to give will be appreciated. If you would like to donate, go to my Patreon link at patron.podbean.com/historicalthoughts. And again, that's patron.podbean/historicalthoughts. Now, let's get back to the episode. So, Kamal, thanks a lot for joining us. How are you doing?
Thank you, Christian. Good in yourself?
Good. So I was just wondering about where. So first about you, like kind of what's your background and what got you interested in studying Druze history?
Well, first of all, I studied political science in Athabasca University, and I recently acquired my graduate certificate in business communications.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, Harvard University.
Oh, Harvard! Wow, that's prestigious. That's really good. So we're talking about Mount Lebanon. Is there any difference between Mount Lebanon and Lebanon, or is Mount Lebanon kind of a Druze imagining of the country or the region?
So Lebanon is split into districts, even back then, and Mount Lebanon is one of the districts in Lebanon. So it's a miniature province, if you will. So Mount Lebanon is in the center of Lebanon, both geographically and politically. As a very strategic point in the east. There were a lot of trade routes that passed towards the mountain, and in fact, it was the powerhouse, sort of say, in the region, and political discourses were born there. Well, history has always been one of my passions. I did a lot of personal research. I do a lot of archiving for my family. We do a lot of family trees and just looking into the historical archives of my community.
Oh, so in your community, and you also mentioned like family history. I know my mom has done a lot of that for my family as well, like genealogy and stuff like that. So what kind of sources do you have for like your personal history documents?
Well, one of my uncles actually has a Takieddine family museum.
Oh, wow.
In Bakleen, which is our hometown in Mount Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And our main family tree is basically a collection of several ancestral family trees that we inherited from family legacy. And in fact, my uncle made a discovery. He met a Syrian person. And he showed my uncle miniature family tree of their branch of the family in Syria, and he managed to prove to him that they basically branched out from our family to there, immigrated there, and they go under the name of Al-Khatib, which means the lecturer. They were public speakers in the Arab mountain, or as it's known colloquially, the Druze mountain in Syria.
And what's that name in Arabic?
Yeah, it's Jabal al-Arab or Jabal al-Druze. Yeah.
So you and your family are Druze. So if somebody hears the word Druze, like what can they think of? Like what can they identify as Druze?
All right, so the Druze are ethnic minority in the Levant, which is Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the region. It is a Abrahamic Judeo-Christian tradition based in the Islamic thought of the region, which means it basically follows monotheism. It does focus on unity between the other traditions. And yes, and the Druze historically have excellent relationships with their neighbors. They are a political majority in Lebanon, in the region, although they are a minority in number.
Oh, so that's interesting. Yeah, so they're numerically they're a minority, but they have political power, like a lot, like quite a bit of it.
Correct.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess one could think of it too. In obviously it's a different group in a different country, but in Syria there's the Alawites, which are numerically lower, but there's more power there too.
Precisely.
Okay. So, and I understand that in Lebanon, there's a kind of a power sharing agreement, I suppose, or between Druze, Maronite Christians, and Muslims in the area, right?
That's right. And these are basically the sects that made Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. Okay, those three. Oh, very interesting. So it's a monotheistic Abrahamic religion, so very similar to Islam, but it also has some elements that are shared with Christianity, I understand.
Yeah, well, I will quote Lamartine to describe, the answer a bit more. He's a French poet that used to frequent Emir or Prince Bashir al-Shahabi II in the late 1700s, early 1800s Mount Lebanon.
Okay.
So this famous French poet, Lamartine, used to frequent the prince, and describing the Druze that he tried to observe, he did say that these peoples do not affiliate to us in the exoteric meaning of things.
Okay.
And he meant the Christians.
Yeah.
Okay. But they are more biblical than us. And
Interesting.
And what he meant by that is that the Druze are a very Puritan tradition that preserved, Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions, but at the same time, perhaps in his European perspective, looked more like the Moors or the Arabs than the local Christians.
Interesting. So he's saying that he was kind of trying to say that almost the Druze were kind of going back to, may I say, quote, pure religion in a way.
Perhaps.
Okay. Oh, very interesting. Okay, so that's really interesting. So, like, is there asceticism in Druze religion and tradition?
Well, the Druze do not really perform asceticism. However, there are ancient spiritual historic sites in Mount Lebanon.
Yeah.
One of the most revered ones is Prophet Job's grotto.
And you were there, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And this is from the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the Druze priests or sheiks do welcome people there, right? And they do perform prayers there, and just to keep the place sacred for everyone, etc. But yeah, they're not necessarily an ascetic tradition. In fact, they are very out there in the community. It's a very working class kind of society.
Okay, so yeah, very very active and open and everything. So in a way, if one says Druze, that could mean you're kind of talking about a religious group, but also an ethnic group in a way.
Yes, precisely.
Okay, very interesting. And so are Druze, ethnically, are they Arabic? Do they mostly speak Arabic, or do they speak other languages as well?
Yes, most of the Druze came from the Arabs of Yemen.
Okay.
Yeah. However, in a recent historic document, there's a historian that also there's an American historian, in fact, that also attributes attributes to documents that say that the Druze also had relations with the Crusaders.
Oh.
And the first Crusaders. So
The first Crusaders. Oh, that came in the late 11th century, if I remember correctly.
precisely, yeah.
Right.
That historian is called T.J. Gorton.
DJ Gorton. Okay.
Yeah, and however, the predominant theory is that the Druze are Arabs.
Yeah.
And their mother tongue is Arabic.
Right.
Although they're also there are a big diaspora, so they do speak other languages as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, you speak Arabic, English, and French, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Well, I guess with Lebanon being in an area with former French colonies and everything like that as well. Yeah. Okay, so now that we've talked about a bit about the Druze religion, the faith, the ethnicity and languages and so on, what a Druze person might be. So what about Druze history? You mentioned the Crusades. Can you say anything more about that?
Yes. In fact, there are a lot of documents that attribute or talk about, the first Crusaders meeting with the Druze people in Mount Lebanon mainly, and also in the Arab mountain in Syria. So there are several stories. One of the predominant ones is that while the Crusaders were fighting with Saladin Ayyubi, right? So the Sunni
Kurd
Muslims.
leaders. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. The Druze took a very neutral stance to the clashes.
Yep.
However, they also were very very welcoming to both parties, and in fact, a lot of the Crusaders' phalanges, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights of Malta or the Knights of Rhodes,
the Hospitalier and
exactly. From their perspective, they recorded having met with the Druze of Lebanon and having shared a lot of of each other's traditions together.
Because there's that kind of a combined Christian tradition as well. There's a little bit of a Christian influence in the Druze faith, so there's a connection there.
Yeah, and the fact remains that the Druze were historically a very diplomatic sect, and they were less interested in wars and more in the preservation of the land and of peace treaties. So they only got into wars in self-defense.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So not a whole lot of expansion and everything like that.
Yes. Yes, and these documents are very scarce, and the accounts are very obscure. Yes.
So there's a fair amount of stuff, but yeah, it's kind of like kind of my experience. Like I would like to do more of it. Like, but sometimes looking at Russian chronicles, for example, like there's a fair amount of Russian chronicles. The primary chronicle is the big one, and all that kind of stuff. But these chronicles were written 200 years after the supposed events take place, and all that kind of stuff. So one professor of mine, he described it this way: like if you come across an early Russian document, you're like please give me. So it kind of sounds like it's the same case with the Druze and the Crusades. But in any case, the Druze kind of took a neutral position in a way as much as they could. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very interesting as well. So I know that also you and I have talked a bit in the past about the Druze going beyond the Middle East. Not just you talked about diaspora, but that's more in the modern period. What about beyond the Middle East, like kind of in the Middle Ages or some other time period? You mentioned the Druze and the Medici, actually.
Yes. In fact, In the Middle Ages, a lot of the European scholars and the Middle Eastern scholars used to travel through the commercial routes of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and both accounts were very naive and ignorant, in fact. Yeah, so from both sides. So, for instance, you had like Middle Eastern travelers go to Europe, and European scholars coming to the Middle East, and the accounts were very Orientalist. Like all of what they saw was from the perspective of a European, right? But decades from that, when we talk more about the Renaissance period, the people who were interested in each other's traditions started settling in these areas, started learning the language, and started living with the locals. The perspectives changed quite a bit.
It's not just this idea of this exotic East, like that's what Orientalism is all about.
Exactly.
You know, the exotic East, it's fascinating, it's mysterious, it's mystical. Yeah, so that's changing.
Absolutely, and you can see a lot of that in Edward Said's books.
Okay.
Orientalism.
Edward Said's, yeah.
Yeah, but in the Renaissance, precisely the Italian Renaissance that happened in Tuscany and Florence.
Right.
You can start seeing some serious diplomatic communication.
Okay.
Between East and West, and precisely between the Druze of Mount Lebanon, which were under Ottoman influence,
right,
and the Medici family in Tuscany.
Okay, yeah. Medici elsewhere as well, or just in Tuscany?
So the Medici family were based in Florence.
Yes.
They were a banking family, of course, and but mainly they were based there. But they also had some major influence in Europe. For example, 4 of the popes were consecutive popes. Medici, right. Yeah.
So you talk about the Druze and the Medici. Was there any kind of, are you aware of any kind of connection, like Medici competing with the Ottomans somehow, and then it's like the Druze are kind of a way to kind of counteract the Turks, or is that just communication, like unilateral relations?
Okay, so here's the short story. We know that the first accounts between the Druze and Tuscan
Medici.
Medici, but even before the Medici, noble families in Tuscany, such as the Pazzi and a lot of the local families there,
right,
the Albizzi, were during the Crusades period.
Okay.
Now, fast forward to the Renaissance, specifically late 1500s, early 1600s. There is a certain character, okay, called Fakhreddin Man the Second.
Okay.
Which is a Druze warlord.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And he had direct diplomatic communication with the Medici. That started by the Medici themselves actually sending letters from Florence to Niha in the Shuf region in Mount Lebanon. We know that for a fact now from historic documents from the Medici private libraries and from the historian that I aforementioned research. Now, so they started the communication.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. And the way it happened was Cosimo de' Medici II, which was the Grand Duke of Tuscany, wanted to develop a relationship with an ally in the East. Yeah. So the main powerhouse in the East back then was the Grand Port of the Ottoman Sultanate.
Sublime Port.
The Sublime Port of the Ottoman Sultanate. Yeah. So what had happened was the West started having scarce economic status versus the Ottoman commercial routes, which were the predominant method of commerce between East and West. So and the Grand Port or the Sublime Port was it was very much hopeful or ambitious in
expanding their economic influence and everything.
Yeah, that's the most diplomatic way to say it. They were very much a raider culture, or an expandatory culture in terms of for politics.
Right.
So in that sense, the Medici family, which were the masters of Tuscany, but by the law of the land or in de facto, they were the masters of Europe.
Right.
Yeah. So they wanted to develop an ally. So they have a very prudent way, okay, of remembering their own history, and they know of this people in Mount Lebanon from their historic accounts. So, and they also have a very bargaining chip factor, or like a great piece of information, is that the Druze under Fakhreddine's leadership were very were very much in opposition to the Ottoman Empire, and not blatantly back then.
Yeah.
But for example, the Ottoman Sultanate or Empire performed something called tax farming.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Sort of like I don't think it was called this under the Ottoman system, but it was like kind of like iqta in the Arabic sides, but at the Turks, I'm not sure what they call
Precisely.
it.
Yeah. It was very much of a feudal system.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the Druze often refused to pay taxes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, they maintained a semi-upper hand with the local pashas of the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Yeah. In several ways. One of their advantage was the way the land is positioned. So, as you know, in military theory, heights have advantage.
That's right, defensive position.
Yes, and minorities used to seek refuge in these heights.
Right.
The two main, in fact, that we should mention here that the two main minorities in Mount Lebanon were the Maronites and the Druze.
Maronite Christians. Yeah.
Yes, so they had this Judeo-Christian ties. They has these ties, and at the same time, the Ottomans seek to divide, right? So what had happened was that these peoples maintained a very dynamic relationship with the Ottomans that fluctuated a lot and was very volatile.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and at the same time, the Druze managed to make of their state, in a way, a semi-independent state. Fakhreddin al-Mani was a political genius that maintained a land that was bigger than modern Lebanon, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it went from like Mount Lebanon to parts of Syria and the surrounding regions. Yes. So, back to the Medici. So under Cosimo II's leadership, Fakhreddin started receiving letters from Tuscany. And we should also mention that the Shuf region in Mount Lebanon is called the Shuf after the Arabic meaning of a sightseeing or to see.
It's kind of like to see. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm thinking back to Rashid Taha. He's an Algerian pop Obrai artist. And he had this song called Shuf, like look.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Precisely. And the reason was the early Druze and Maronites in the region sought these places to foresee any Sunni Muslim attacks from the opposition or the adversary phalanges of the other sects that ruled the other areas in Lebanon.
Okay.
Yeah, which again, it's a feudal system, right?
Yeah, right.
Yes. So
it's not quite unified. Like, so the
Yes.
the Sultan in Istanbul could, or of course, it used to be Constantinople, but can be he has some authority, but only so much.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the port also had stronger ties with the Sunni Islamic sects that were there.
Yes.
Right, for obvious reasons, like for more of a similarity in tradition, etc.
Yeah.
Although the Druze were close friends to the Ottomans, but with those differences, these were the dynamics.
Right. So it was a really tenuous relationship. It was like,
Exactly.
we're under the Ottomans and we'll maintain relations, but we're also going to hedge our bets with these Medici over here, which are rivals of the Ottomans.
And in fact, the Shiite Muslims, which today are a majority in Lebanon, back then were a minority themselves, and they were more of a Bedouin tradition that came to south of Lebanon. Yes, so back then the main focus in Mount Lebanon were on these two traditions, and basically the action of preserving Judeo-Christian tradition in the mountain, precisely in a geopolitical or demographic manner, in response to the expenditure of the Ottoman tax farms.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the connections with the Medici are ways to counteract this. Very interesting. And so what kind of so obviously there's diplomatic relations between the Druze and the Medici. Was there anything are you aware of anything where the Ottomans tried to stop this?
Yes. In fact, during that period, the Druze and the Sunnis, or the Sunni Muslims in Lebanon, had very aggressive encounters.
Yeah.
In fact, Fakhreddin, although he enjoyed a very high status and kind of grandiose, how do you say,
grandeur. He was kind of a loud,
yes,
bombastic.
or in optics, he was kind of a legend.
Yeah.
But his rivals, the Sunnis in Lebanon, or their feudal society, used to make jokes about. So Fakhreddin was a smaller man, and they used to make jokes that if Fakhreddin's cup or glass fell from his pocket on his horse, it wouldn't break on the ground.
Basically saying, "You so small,"
Yeah. So back to Renaissance Tuscany. The Europeans sought Fakhreddin's alliance, and Fakhreddin needed another powerhouse to back him against his attempts to rebel against the Ottoman Sultanate.
Right.
So what had happened is Fakhreddin self-exiled or made a diplomatic trip to Tuscany, met with the Grand Duke of the Medici, and he sought refuge under or in their court. Yes. There a very interesting relationship had developed. Fakhreddin, in many of their or Italian manuscripts under the name Fakhreddino, was a very respected and very welcomed Middle Eastern Druze monarch. There were castles built there for him. He brought a lot of tradition from the Italian or from the European Renaissance back to the Middle East. Two of the most interesting things he had brought back with him are architecture. So Levantine architecture is an obvious mixture or fusion of Islamic art or architecture and Italian Tuscan houses.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And specifically in Druze areas this happens, or is that just Levantine in general?
Yeah, in Mount Lebanon specifically.
In Lebanon, yeah.
But it also has influences in other places in Lebanon, like Beirut, the capital city.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the second interesting aspect Fakhreddin brought back to him, with him, is the agricultural terraces in Mount Lebanon.
Oh, yeah.
Right, where the farmers would plant, right? So
Yeah. Huh. That is really cool. And nothing like a military alliance or trade alliance or anything like that, eh?
in fact, there was. So the Medici backed the Druze warlord a lot, military-wise, but it didn't develop much.
There's only so much you can do trying to get past the Ottomans, when Italy is pretty. It's like in the middle of the Mediterranean, and then to go all the way to Lebanon, there's a lot of Ottomans to go through as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Precisely. And what had happened is, in Fakhreddin's absence, the Ottomans were very well aware of what was taking place, and they assassinated Fakhreddin's son.
Oh.
Yeah, so historians believe that this affected his psychology a lot.
I would imagine.
Yeah, and in political psychology, this would be fatal in a feudal family, right? Where, this was Fakhreddin's heir, to the throne kind of thing, right? So, what had happened was a very visual decline of the Man tradition after these aggressions. And what happened eventually is the Ottomans oppressed the Man rebellions.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Fakhreddin fled to his historic tower in the Shuf region, in Niha specifically. It's a village in Mount Lebanon, and the Ottoman phalanx followed him up to the tip of the tower, where it is said in legend that Fakhreddin fell with his horse from the tip of the tower, to the valley, and vanished. So.
And vanished, didn't die, vanished. Kind of like a King Arthur idea, coming back. That's very interesting. Is there a lot of myth about Fakhreddin? Like a lot of poetry and legends that you've seen, or is it mostly historical records?
Well, it is said in most historic books that Fakhreddin never trusted anyone in his life, including his family. He had some major trust issues, as they would say today. There was more historic lore about Fakhreddin's mother. As it was said, she was a bit of a mystic.
So there's a little bit more about her. Anything else that kind of makes them focus on her?
Not a lot of documentation about that, but I'll tell you something. Fakhreddin's childhood was, kind of mysterious, as in the Man tradition, which so the Man was a historic clan in the Druze, right? Or kind of like a noble family, right? So Fakhreddin's forefathers had all, been martyrs in their constant
rebellion against the Ottomans, and
constant mainly struggles against the Ottomans' expenditure, taxation farms. Now, there is an interesting fact about Fakhreddin's childhood. As I said, Fakhreddin's father, even like Korkamaz al-Man or al-Mani, was also assassinated by the Ottomans in the same tower.
No, wow.
And what had happened was Fakhruddin inherited a lot of rebellion. That when he was born, his mother hid him from the Ottomans in order just for the Druze prince to survive, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so that he can be fit to rule.
You're right.
When he's old enough, right? So there are two theories of where Fakhruddin had resided when he was a child. One theory is he's resided with another Druze emir or prince, which was Saifuddin al-Tanuk. Okay, and by the way, the Tanukids are another Druze noble family or clan.
Oh,
right?
okay, so Tanuk.
Yeah, the Tanuks. And this is one theory, but the other theory, which is more predominant historically, is that Fakhruddin was hidden in his childhood with the house of Al-Khazin, which is a Maronite Christian house.
Oh, okay.
Which were friends of the Al-Manis, right?
Seems like a common theme of the Druze and Maronite Christian friendship.
Yes, alliances and sometimes competitive so competitive relationship.
Oh, okay,
yeah, in the Levant.
Give and take.
Yes. And what had happened was Fakhruddin developed sentiments or like a good relationship with the Maronites of Mount Lebanon.
Yep.
And in fact, he was the one responsible for welcoming the expenditure of the Maronite Christians into their new home.
Oh wow!
The Mount Lebanon.
Oh.
So when he was older, he developed some serious alliances with the Maronite Christians, and he welcomed them to the Shuf.
Wow.
Now, fast forward to 1860. There was some serious clashes between the two groups. Yeah.
Between the Maronites and the Druze.
Yes, and in fact, there is a recent novel called The Druze of Belgrade.
Oh yes.
Yeah, which talks about how when the Druze clans fought or won over the clashes from the attacks over their
territories and
and feudal lands. The French had ousted or interfered with their influence,
right,
and ousted many of the Druze warriors to Belgrade.
Oh, wow. Yeah. To Belgrade of all places.
Yeah.
Austria-Hungary at the time.
Yes.
Ottomans at the time. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So if you compare these two eras, that would turn out to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Wow, that's very interesting. Okay, so like for modern day period, we did talk a little bit about Druze in modern times, that there's a sizable diaspora abroad beyond the Levant and everything. What about the Druze dynamics like today, like in the modern world? Is some comment to there?
Well, currently, with the Syrian war's turmoil in the region, the Druze are in a very sensitive spot.
Right.
Yes, where they are kind of historically in Lebanon, they are again a political majority, and mainly because they are sort of like the middle, right?
Oh yeah, in the middle of everything.
Yes, they're the middleists, and they're often the ones who play the role of kind of like the Senate, right?
Okay.
Because when both parties cannot decide on a thing, they will refer to this minority for balance or for split voting, sort of like split the vote.
Oh.
So, however, the Druze are historic friends of the other sects in Lebanon. They are known to be peacekeepers in the region. So this is their current status, and there is a lot of Druze communities across the world. Edmonton is actually has the biggest Druze community in Canada.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, just above Toronto.
Okay, great. So as far as like sources, like if people want to learn more about Druze history and everything like that. What sources could you point them to in English or even in Arabic or in French?
T.J. Gorton wrote a really good book called Renaissance Emir, subtitled "A Druze Warlord at the Court of the Medici."
Oh, okay.
It's a very well acclaimed history book in the recent documents about the topic. And the reason is, for the first time, there was a conversation in one book from, you know, the Middle Eastern perspective,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the private libraries of the Medici, which he had access to.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
it's yeah. So he gets the local perspective in both accounts, in both the Medici and the Druze sides.
Precisely, and as an Orientalist, he also had a pretty, first-hand approach on things. He knew Arabic, so he wrote the primary sources, not the translations, and I think he also had Italian documents translated, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's also a really important book about our context in French by Alphonse de Lamartine, the French poet I had mentioned before. Uh, and the book is called Notes d'un voyageur, or Notes of a Traveler. Yeah, and he talks about more of the, Prince Emir El Shahabi era, which is, again, like in the late 1700s, early 1800s. But there's a lot of great historic accounts about the minorities or the political majorities of Mount Lebanon. Yeah, in the pre-modernist political landscape. In Arabic, there is a scholar called Dr. Sami Makarim, which is one of the most, if not the most, revered um, Druze scholar, and he wrote a history book. In Arabic, it's called لبنان في عهد الأمراء التنوخيين, which means Lebanon in the era of the Tanukid emirs.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that book because it sheds more light on the Tanukid era rather than the Man and the era we focused on tonight.
Mm.
Um, and this is a really glorious era where Mount Lebanon was initiated by the Druze emirs, and their emirate, or like their princedom, went as far as to reach to Jordan.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So now, perhaps the most important question: if I go to Lebanon, what must I see, and what restaurant should I go to?
Well, if you like history, and particularly that history, it's a good idea to go to Mount Lebanon, to Deir al Kamar, which is the city state of the emirs in that era, and to Beit ad-Din, of course, where there are many magnificent castles of these eras. As for her restaurant in the area, there's a good restaurant called Garbatella in Baklin, my hometown.
Oh, okay.
And there's also a new restaurant called Beit Al Kamar, which means House of the Moon, in Dar Al Kamar. So yeah, and of course Beirut. It's a very culinary culture in terms of metropolitan cities. Pretty unique. So
Okay, that's great. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for chatting with us today, and this it was really fun. Thanks a lot for coming in.
thanks.